we should maximize how we spend our time, but also maximize how much time we have. In our lives, we have these sort of windows of opportunity to do things. And if you don't do them during those windows of opportunity, you may not ever be able to do them again. What is important to me now? Number one, you have to force yourself to think, what matters to me now? And then number two, you have to say, am I living my life now in a way that makes sense for what my goals are now, as opposed to what my goals were 30 years ago?
What if aging wasn't something we had to fear, but was something we could embrace with intention and joy? Today, I'm joined by Dr. Greg, the nation's premier longevity planner, Stanford-trained physician, author, philanthropist. Dr. Greg has dedicated his career to helping elite professionals like you, physicians and high net worth leaders, just design longer, healthier, and more fulfilling lives through his 4-pillar longevity approach, which he is going to go in detail with today. And he's going to highlight a number of things, which I'm going to bring out. I know things that you are dealing with today as a high performer, whether you're the operator or whether you're the family office. I know you're struggling with some of these things. There's so many actionable tips that Dr. Greg is going to bring out that's going to help you. Dr. Greg, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm honored to have you on. I know that I personally am excited to hear your advice today, and I know the listeners who are all high achievers, whether they're family offices or high net worth investors, or whether they're operators of large organizations. They need to hear your advice today. And before we just jump right in, tell us a little bit about what inspired you to specialize in longevity planning and really lifestyle designing.
Well, it's funny. So I'm a physician by training. I'm an anesthesiologist. And years ago, I remember reading the book, The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. And if you haven't read this book, you have to read it. It's one of my top 5 must-read books, in my opinion. It really reframed the way I looked at the world, and I looked at my life and career and everything else. And at the time, I was working a lot in medicine, a lot of hours. I was on call. And truthfully, I hate to admit, but I wasn't seeing my kids as much as I should. I'm sure a lot of your listeners could relate to this. And work was just a big part of my life. And I just sort of took for granted that that's what you do because that's what my peers were doing. The people around me were doing it. So therefore it seemed normal to me to do. But I never really, until I read that book, I never really stopped and thought, should I be doing this? Is this really how I want to spend the one life I've got here on this earth and the limited window of time I have with my kids? And that really kind of opened my eyes, and one thing led to another, and it made me really kind of rethink everything. Like, how do I want to spend my time? What should I be doing and not doing? And then at the same time, this sort of concept of longevity medicine came out. As a doctor, you always talk about, well, you try to treat this disease, treat that, maybe prevent this, prevent that, but you don't really think about it in terms of actually living longer or improving your health span, which is the fraction of your time where you're healthy. It's funny, if you ask a room of people, do you want to live to be 100? A lot of people won't raise their hands because in our minds, you think, well, once you're past a certain age, you may be alive, but you're in this terrible state. But now there's all this cool stuff we could do where the goal is that you're kind of healthy up until the last day, then you kind of kick the bucket suddenly. So I think the combination of this idea that we should maximize how we spend our time, but also maximize how much time we have is just, to me, is a very powerful kind of common sense thing to do. And so that's what I'm pursuing now.
Love that. I also love that book. I think that was kind of just mind altering for me as well many years ago to think about that. And, speak to, I know you work with lots of, say, high achieving professionals, right? And across multiple industries and family offices. And speak to, just as we get started here, maybe some patterns that you've noticed that just help you to lead to develop this 4-pillar approach that I know we're gonna dive into.
Yes, and you're right. So I work with a lot of family offices, RAAs, high net worth individuals. And unfortunately, what I've seen for a lot of these high performing people is that number one, people are largely overcommitting themselves to work, or they're doing work that doesn't necessarily bring them happiness anymore. It may have at one time, but not necessarily anymore. So people could be working a lot and they could be making a lot of money and they could be rising up in the ranks, but they're often not happy. And this is especially true in middle age and beyond. You see this high rate of burnout, job dissatisfaction, a high rate of divorce, unfortunately, alcoholism. And you wonder how you get there when you have someone who's smart, well educated, hardworking, they're driven, they've got all these things going for them.
They look so successful on Facebook.
Yeah, so exactly. Exactly. They've got good Instagram pictures, but they're not happy. And so that's what led to this sort of four-pillar approach, because there are actual things we can do that are evidence-based and make sense, common sense things that we can do to make ourselves happier. And people aren't doing them. And I see it all the time. And career success does not insulate you from this.
So you're saying even if I look successful on Facebook, it may not actually mean I've got my ducks in order at home.
Exactly.
Well, let's dive in a little bit to those four key pillars. And why don't we just start there? And I know you talk about these often, so I'll let you kind of guide that a little bit. But obviously, I want to get into maybe some just longevity things that maybe differ from the mainstream, right? That a lot of us may be hit with all day on social media or whatnot. But I know we'll get into some of those things. But what are those four key pillars that you talk about often?
Sure. So the four key pillars I would put as part of longevity planning or lifestyle design is healthspan, which is, we talked about earlier, the idea that you want to not only live longer, but you want to have more good, energetic years where you could do stuff. Happiness, and there is actually a science to happiness. There's good research. There's a lot of great people. Arthur Brooks, actually, he's an author. He's written some good books on happiness, and particularly on how the steps to become happy actually change as we get older. So you can intentionally do things to be happier. Career, and a lot of that is thinking about, are we doing the right career that makes sense for us today, as opposed to the career that made sense earlier? And I love talking about career. We spent all day talking about this. But are we doing the right career? Are we devoting the right amount of time to our career? Should we be thinking about a second or third career? Especially since, if we're living to 90, 95 years old, it's not likely you're going to retire at 60 or 65. You're probably going to work longer. Do you want to do the same thing the whole time? Do you want to switch to a new career or even a third career midway? And then the fourth pillar is connection. There's one thing that we know for sure that will help you both live longer and live happier, and that's having genuine friendships. One of the problems that we run into is a lot of people that work a lot, their friends are their work colleagues. Their friends, maybe they grab a drink with after work, or they have lunch with. Maybe they go to a baseball game with them, something like that. But I have sad news, which is, and I've seen this over and over again, when you retire, those friends are going to disappear. It's not that they're bad people, but most of those people are with you either transactionally or because of convenience. You're working in the office, they're working in the office. It's easy to just go grab a drink afterwards. So it's vital that we intentionally invest in real friendships early on.
I think that's such a good point. Investing in real friendships early on, that just affects our life in so many ways, right? To have, quote, real friendships. Speak to maybe a few techniques there while we're on that topic, to how the listener could be thinking about that now. Like, what is a real friendship, and to really think long term for myself?
Well, so I ask executives, one of the questions I always ask, well, when was the last time you've seen your childhood or, say, high school best friend? And unless that person lives down the block, it's been a long time, like years. And they'll say, well, I'm busy, or, oh, I text every now and then. But that isn't the same as actually seeing someone in person. And a lot of people have this attitude, well, we're such good friends, we'll catch up again later. We'll catch up again when it makes sense. We'll catch up when we're retired. And I'm telling you that is a huge mistake. And that's a huge mistake for a few reasons. One, you're going to drift away from that person with time, even if you send an occasional text message. But sadly, something that happened to you or to them, they may get sick, you may get sick, that may change that. Or you may not see them again. Stuff happens. And so, I'll tell you a story. Actually, about a half a year ago, I made a decision. I'm from California. We weren't in California. We moved to Texas, and now we're here in Georgia. I said, you know what? I haven't seen my California friends in a few years. I took a week off of work and I went by myself. I know I lost money because I wasn't working, but I took a week off of work for no reason other than to just go to California and catch up with some of my friends that I hadn't seen in a long time. And I'll tell you, I am so happy that I did that because it reconnected me with them. Now we speak a lot more often. I know what's going on in their life. They know what's going on in mine. I feel much closer to them. I just feel really good about it. And the money that I lost for not working that week is totally insignificant compared to the relationship I built by going to see them.
But where are we placing our value, right? Are we thinking short term versus long term?
We keep thinking we could do stuff later. We could go to the gym later. We could see our friends later. We'll do this. But the problem is that later often doesn't come. Or when it does come, it's not the same as it was back in the day. So I am a big believer that you should do things now when you want to rather than later. And I think friendships are a big one. There's actually a good book about this topic too that I also recommend called Die with Zero by Bill Perkins. I love this book. This is another one of those books that like totally reframed how I look at things. But one of the things he brought up in the book, which I try to advocate with anyone I work with, is that in our lives, we have these sort of windows of opportunity to do things. And if you don't do them during those windows of opportunity, you may not ever be able to do them again. So, for example, if your goal is to spend some time with your parents, maybe you want to spend a good quality time with them, traveling somewhere, for example, you can only do that while they're alive and healthy enough to do that. If you keep waiting, they may not be able to. Or if your goal is to go spend a month in France with your daughter, she'll do that when she's younger, but she may not do that when she's an adult because she's got her own life and she may have kids or other things. If your goal is to go backpacking across Asia, you can do that when you're younger. You're probably not going to be doing that when you're 80. Even if you have the money and the time, you probably won't have the health or the stamina. So there's windows of time that you could do things. And you got to hit stuff during those windows or else you're just going to lose those opportunities.
I remember reading that book. It's probably been a couple years ago now. And it inspired me to do exactly what you just said. But it wasn't, and you briefly mentioned this, and I'm grateful that you did, because it's not just like my best time to do this thing, but the person that you want to do that thing with. Like what's their time period of being able to do that thing, and especially a parent or a grandparent. Right. Somebody like that. It inspired me to really think about like my mother. Like I wanted to take her on a trip. And like you said earlier, I just thought, we'll do that someday. Or she really wants to go to this place. I really want to do that for her, but we'll do it sometime. But when I read that book, I thought, I better get that scheduled. Because like she doesn't have too many more years where she's going to be physically able. And like you said, maybe she can get around, but she's not going to feel like it, like going and doing something like that. And so I wanted to do it when she would feel really good doing it as well and enjoy it so much more.
Yeah, that was a wise call, because there's just, the sad truth, this is where the healthspan thing comes in. Obviously, if you make good choices, hopefully you can do the stuff you want to do later in life. But no matter what you do, and no matter how much broccoli you eat and how many times you hit the gym, at some point your ability to do stuff does contract. Though you do want to do things when you can. And so I think I think you had a really good plan to do that. That was smart that you did that.
Speak to some, I love the topic on happiness as well, and just, joy. And, what about some just practical tips on just being intentional and like cultivating happiness? How do you, or just every day? Because I feel like it's a mindset shift, right? And you got to be intentional, but I'm not the doctor here.
Yeah, so there are actually good evidence-based things you could do to be happier. And, of course, some of these are obvious, but when you combine them together, it really is powerful. So, there's the kind of obvious stuff like sleeping. If you're not getting enough sleep, you're not going to be as happy. And also you're going to have a lot of other problems. But sleep, exercise, clear evidence that exercise improves happiness, decreases depression more than antidepressants do. So exercise is one of those things. I'm actually wearing an Oura ring right now, but there's other things like Apple Watches and stuff like that. You want to exercise, go to the gym, but you also kind of want to exercise throughout the day, at least kind of move your body throughout the day. clear benefit for happiness. Morning sunlight, I know it can be tough. Where I am now, it's super pleasant now in Atlanta, thank goodness. But I know it's hard in some places. But if you can catch some morning sunlight, that clearly makes you happy. It's one of the benefits of having a dog because that forces you to do that. The friendship thing, which is spending time with your friends, the genuine friends, is clear benefit for happiness. Drinking coffee, interestingly, good research on that. I probably won't have to convince anybody that coffee or tea makes you happier, but it does.
I think when I started, really focusing on my morning routine and some of these things that you're mentioning, it's also when I started drinking coffee. So that's so neat that you bring that up.
It sounds trite, but it's true, and there's evidence for this. I think one of the more fundamental things, though, and this relates to both happiness and career, is that you need to reassess what your goals are. And you want to think, am I living my life in a way that matches my goals today, as opposed to what my goals were many years ago? And this kind of ties in the happiness and the career element. And what I mean by that is, so I'm a physician, and I decided that I would be a physician probably around age 15, 16, something like that. That was the point I decided, I better take these AP bio classes and I better do all this stuff so I can go to college, and then go to medical school and go down the whole route, being a doctor. So I picked my career around 15, 16. I bet a lot of your listeners to some degree did the same. So now me as a middle-aged adult am still following the career me as a 16-year-old decided. When you think about it, that's kind of crazy. I mean, so many of us are doing what we decided when we were 16, maybe when you were 20, something like that. We're still doing the same thing we did then. And we're still living our lives in pursuit of a lot of the things we wanted back then. I mean, what did you want as a teenager? You wanted money, you wanted power, you wanted some sort of fame or recognition. You wanted all these things, and you weren't thinking so much about health. You weren't thinking so much about friendships. You weren't thinking so much about legacy or mentoring. There are certain things you were thinking about. And what I found is a lot of people, and this is especially true for high-performing people, they're still following the goals they had as a teenager. And that's a mistake. And it's a mistake because if you forced yourself to stop and think, what is important to me now? It may not be those same things, power, money, maybe, I'm sure everybody likes that, but that may not be quite as important now as connection or health or mentorship or legacy or philanthropy or other things. Number one, you have to force yourself to think, what matters to me now? And then number two, you have to say, am I living my life now in a way that makes sense for what my goals are now, as opposed to what my goals were 30 years ago?
That could be really hard for people to think about, oh, maybe I should change my career, right? And you feel like you're older, or that could be scary, right? How have you seen people do that successfully, or like to be, I guess, to be committed to really the long term, like you're talking about, and seeing that, okay, this is a shift that I should make. Any advice there on how you've seen people do that well?
Well, I think there's a few ways to approach it. And you're right, it's hard. If you've been doing something for a while, and especially if you're good at it and you're getting recognition and you're making a lot of money and you've climbed up the ladder, it can be hard to say, you know what, I'm going to leave on top. I mean, how many people, we see this with athletes, right? They stay on in their sport past their prime. People don't often leave on top. They kind of stay too long. And so I think there's a few ways to approach this. One of them, I think, and this is great for high performing people, and I recommend this. I don't do this personally, but I refer people out for this, is to go speak to a good financial planner, a good independent financial planner, not the one that you have to pay them for a percentage of investment dollars, but someone that you could pay by the hour to give you their unvarnished advice. When I work with people one-on-one, I always insist that people do this, unless they've already done it. And I have them say, I have them speak to their independent financial planner, and I have them say, how do they stand financially? And my guess is probably a lot of your listeners, if they were to speak to the financial planner, would probably be told they're fine. If they retired today, they'd be fine because they have enough money in the bank, they've got enough assets, maybe they have other pensions or other things. They don't need more money, or they need less money than you think. When you hear that from someone that you trust, that's independent, I think that's important. I think that's a good first step, because the problem is a lot of us live in this fear: oh, we don't have enough. We don't have enough. We have to keep getting more. We have to keep getting more. But the truth is, for many people, that just isn't the case. So if it's true that you have enough and you could retire today, then it's easier to then ask the question, is my 80-hour week super demanding job that I'm doing today that I don't really like, and it's preventing me from sleeping, and it's preventing me from going to the gym, and it's preventing me from seeing my best friend or my spouse or my kids or my parents, is it worth it? And I think when you look at it that way, it's easy to say, well, maybe it's not worth getting a divorce over a job that's paying me money I don't need.
I love how you just bring the reality right in there. It's like, really think about the implications of keeping this 80-hour week. And what is your goal long term? Is it, just more success that's not even needed? Your bank account's already big enough, like you said. Is it going to cost you your marriage potentially to keep that going and to double that bank account when you didn't need it in the first place? I just think you need somebody to really ask you a question like that and just put it right in your face. Like, have you thought about this? Because I think most people haven't. They haven't like sat down and thought about themselves 20 years in the future or 30 years in the future, and some of us, it may not be that long, even to where, you need to like think about yourself then, looking back to where you're at now, and thinking, okay, what would create that, say, perfect life or perfect life metrics, is what a lot of people are, I call it. But, is what I'm doing now really going to achieve that? And what I find is most people, when they think about those metrics, there's rarely a business that's listed or a success metric from their business, or even a financial piece. Like the first thing they say is marriage and children and relationships. And are you thinking about how that's, how you're investing into those things today? Because like you said earlier, we all just think, oh, well, we'll do that in the future. Right.
And, I want to tell you, like, as a related point to this, and you were hitting on this, is the truth is, for 99.9% of us, your work, I'm going to be blunt here, your work doesn't care about you. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So I told you I used to live in California. So for many years, I worked at this major hospital there, a very big hospital, very successful. And there was this one guy who was the head of the hospital. He was the head person. So his name would always come up. If anything was happening, his name would be attached to it. If you needed like some funding for something, or you were trying to change something, you'd have to somehow get his approval or get his staff's approval. He was involved in everything, and you knew about him, and he was there for like, I don't know, 25 years. I mean, a long time. He left, I don't know, maybe eight or 10 years ago now. But I could tell you, within a year or two, within less than a year, within 6 months, nobody mentioned his name anymore. It never came up. Totally forgotten. Within a couple years, probably most people didn't even know who he was. And this is a guy that the hospital revolved around and was there for like 25 years. So if a guy like that, who's there that long, who was that important, could basically evaporate from conversation in a couple months and be forgotten in a year or two, what does that say for the rest of us? Your work is not what's going to define you, and your work doesn't care about you. It's blunt, it sounds harsh, but it's the truth. The people that care about you are you, your relatives, your spouse, your kids, parents, your close friends, and your dog. That's who cares about you. And so you want to make sure that you're giving enough time to those people.
Love that. That's so helpful to think through. Your work does not care about you. I want to transition a little bit here, Dr. Greg, just for time's sake, because this is something that piece that I want you to have a few minutes to talk about as well has shaped, I know, my family in a big way over the last, say, 10 years or so, and that's nutrition. And I think many years ago, my wife and I thought that we ate healthy. We thought that, we had all these assumptions, right? The thing says organic or it says whatever. Okay. Yeah. Well, and it wasn't until really there was a child, one of our children, who had an issue that we started doing a little research on. And then it was like, it just changed our entire world. When we changed it for that child, my wife changed it for all of us in the house. And there was big positive ramifications from it. So it really helped us to say, well, wait a minute, what else is going on here? So, I wanted you to be able to share, about nutrition because I feel like it's so important, and about our daily habits around nutrition as well. But whether that's even, I know you talk about fasting, some off as or fasting and training and things like that. Maybe speak to that.
Yeah, I love to. And so nutrition is a great topic. I really believe in the power of nutrition to live a longer, healthier, and more productive and happier life. And the problem is that when you hear people talk about nutrition, you're going to hear 1,000 different things. This is good, do this diet, do that diet. There's a lot of conflicting things. Some of it's because there's conflicting data. A lot of it is because the data is bad. I mean, just to be blunt, nutrition studies are difficult to do. For example, if you wanted to test and see whether eating an apple a day is healthy or not, that's a really hard study to do. Number one, no one's going to pay for it. Number two, it's going to take a long time. How are you going to measure it? So a lot of what we do is based on assumptions. And then there's just a lot of shysters around. There are people that are trying to sell you this, they're trying to sell you that. They've got their own agenda. So what I try to advocate for is common sense nutrition, stuff that's clearly proven to be beneficial, stuff that stood the test of time, and stuff that makes sense. So there are some clear common sense nutrition advice that I can give you that is going to work for almost everybody. One, avoid sugar, but the less sugar you get, and I don't mean sugar in an apple, I mean like added sugar, usually in candies and processed foods and sugary drinks like apple juice, soda, frappuccinos, things like that. The less sugar, the better. There's no debate about this. Number two, the more vegetables you eat, the better. This is another clearly proven thing. The more broccoli, kale, cauliflower, asparagus, beets, whatever you like, the more of those, the better. And almost certainly, the more variety of those things, the better. So there's a lot of talk about how you want your healthy gut microbiome. You want to have healthy intestinal bacteria. And so those are fed if you eat a variety of different vegetables. So the more vegetables you eat and the bigger variety of vegetables you eat, the better. The more fiber you eat, the better. Those are and also I would say, and was controversial, but I think it's going to be less controversial. You want to make sure you're getting enough protein. A lot of people don't. And so I count protein. I'm vegetarian. I mean, I eat a little bit of fish, but I guess pescatarian, you'd say. But I count how much protein I get. And you probably want to get an adult male probably wants to get, an adult probably wants to get at least 70 to 100 grams per day. When you get older, you might want more. So I count protein, but you can get it from all different kinds of sources. And then one other, I think, clearly proven true thing is that you want to minimize processed foods. And a lot of that is because all kinds of garbage goes into these things, and we don't really know that a lot of that stuff is safe. There's preservatives, there's artificial colors. Some just recently got banned. There are emulsifiers. This just came out. Your episode here is timely because this just came out. There are these studies that show that kind of common emulsifiers like polysorbate 80, which are used in ice creams and processed foods, are really bad for us. So the more processed foods you eat, the more opportunity you have to eat a lot of garbage. So I would say if you can minimize your sugar, eat a large amount of a variety of vegetables, make sure you're getting enough protein, and minimize processed foods and get enough fiber, you're kind of getting like a really big bang for your buck with nutrition. These other things like vegan versus carnivore, keto, this, that, I don't think anyone really knows that for sure. And people have their opinions, and it probably depends on the person. But if you stick to those 5 basic things, you're going to get almost all the bang for your buck you can out of nutrition.
I find oftentimes people say, "Oh, this diet has just changed my life over the last 30 or 60 days." I'm like, well, one of the biggest things I think that diet did was got sugar out of your out of your diet, or it helped you to eat more, vegetables or some protein, whatever. But it got those processed things out of your life, whether it was no matter what diet. So they think it's that diet, but no, it just got rid of some things that you probably shouldn't have been eating anyway. It seems like to me. But speak to what about the role that really mental health plays in longevity, and just the prioritizing mental health.
So we've had a real crisis with this, actually. And, a lot of people talked about the mental health crisis for kids and teenagers. We're both parents. and you see it, especially for teenage girls. It's a real problem. This is one of the reasons for the adults listening to this. When you're overworking, you're not spending as much time with your teenagers, and that's to their disadvantage. But there's a real mental health crisis, especially among teenage girls. There was a good book about it, The Anxious Generation. But, a lot of the ideas that social media is terrible, especially for teens. Too much screen time is terrible. They're not spending enough time outside. They're not spending enough time with their friends. Even beyond teenagers, we're seeing a mental health crisis among adults as well. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with isolation, loneliness, and feeling like you're not connecting with the community. So focusing on your mental health, I think, is important. And I mean, and then collectively for our community, focusing on our mental health is important. And I think that the steps to do this are cultivating friendships, making sure that you're doing something that has purpose, that you feel is purposeful for you, practicing gratitude. Every night before we go to bed, we say prayers, and we go around the room and we say a couple things that were our favorite parts of the day. And it's fun to hear what other people thought, but also it's a good exercise for you because it forces you to think, oh yeah, this is good. Even if you had a bad day, if you get home and you just want to go to bed, you've had a bad day. If I said, well, come up with a couple things that were good today, you probably can come up with a couple things. Oh, my lunch was really good, or like the weather was just so beautiful when I took my dog out this morning. You can come up with a couple things, and those things give you something nice to hold on to that when you go to bed, you could feel good about. An exercise, coffee, like there's actually a few good things for mental health that you can do beyond, the standard stuff like antidepressants or going to a therapist or something. And I'm not opposed to that, but you want to do the lifestyle things that'll help you.
Just this morning, actually, my wife and I were talking about how we want to just practice gratefulness. And so it's like first thing in the morning, like let's think of some things we're grateful for, of just changing our mindset for the day. Of like, from, I don't feel like getting out of bed to, oh, here's some things that I'm really grateful for this morning, right? And just changing that, how we're thinking right away. No doubt. But then teaching your children to think that way as well. I love how you're like asking them questions to help them to start thinking that way. If you're doing that long enough, that's something that's going to stick with them most likely for a very long time.
And I think this is something we should be teaching our kids, because if we're the type, we kind of complain a lot, we're kind of negative, that will convey down to our kids. And I think as parents, it's important for us to try to help our kids see the bright side of things. Even if you're having a bad day, and even if your kid is having a bad day, like I said, there's always stuff, even if it's a small thing, like a good cup of coffee, or you just got a new pen that you really like, whatever it is, those things can add a lot of value to people, and it's worth focusing on that. And, people say, well, I can't control everything that happens to me. I can't even always control how I feel about something. That may be true, but you can control where you direct your attention. If I had a problem like I don't know, like I had a plumbing leak, for example, obviously that bothers you. You're angry about it. You're worried. It's expensive. If you just keep dwelling on this, or dwelling on the fight you had with your boss, it's going to bring your day down. You can intentionally redirect your attention to, oh, but at least I'm seeing my best friend on Friday, or at least, tonight we're going to that new restaurant I really wanted to go to. You can't always change how you feel, but you can change to a large degree where you put your attention. And that's a great way of making yourself happier.
Dr. Greg, speak to the leaders who want to inspire, healthier living and well-being, longevity in their organizations, to the people that work for them.
I was just speaking at a conference at Houston Methodist, and it was sort of on this topic about burnout and wellness. So it turns out that there's really two big components to this that people don't think about. There's the personal resiliency bit, and then there's an organizational component. And so if you're a leader and you run an organization, you're trying to make your employees healthier, happier, you have to focus on both of those. So personal resiliency, personal health could be things like maybe giving people talks about nutrition, maybe having a yoga instructor come, once a week, or massage come once a week, or that sort of thing, things that can strengthen your employees. But there's also an organizational component to it, which is, why don't you try to weed out what's causing frustration or the pebble in the shoe effect for your employees that you could organizationally do? It may be that there's some extra paperwork that just drives people crazy, or there's some extra steps they have to take that maybe you could eliminate, or maybe if you change the hours people work or you shift things around, there's stuff you could do organizationally that's not dependent on that person, but that gives a better infrastructure for people to be happier. And so, what I would recommend is these general personal resiliency things. There's so many ways to do that. You could have food courts, you could, farmers markets, things like that, advice, but you can't just depend on that employee feeling better. You have to kind of restructure your organization to avoid burnout. And there's actually some pretty good published research on this about how to do that. And also, there are consultants that do this, or consultants that come to your place of business and they interview employees, they try to figure out what's driving people up the wall, and they can help you sort of structurally change your business to improve wellness and decrease burnout.
It's interesting to try to figure out from your employees what's driving them crazy, right? And I found like we do monthly what I call alignment meetings, and so I'm meeting with people who report to me on a monthly basis because I don't want to wait 6 months or a year to find out that they really hate this thing that they're doing. So that's been really helpful for us, and it's a way for they know that time's coming too, right? It's just 4 weeks away or 3 weeks. It's not 12 months before they can share with me that there's something that's really just a thorn in their side, what they're having to do. I appreciate you bringing that up. And you mentioned, burnout, and it's something you talk about often, and how it's just a growing issue with high achievers. And maybe speak to some the bigger misconceptions around burnout, or how you've helped people to kind of rediscover joy in what they're doing.
So there are a lot of causes of burnout. Well, first of all, burnout is skyrocketing. Certainly in the medical field, we see a lot of it, but in the legal field, there's a high rate of lawyer burnout, financial professionals, accountants. It's affecting nearly every field. I mean, some more than others. So there are a variety of causes, and most people have multiple causes. Overwork, of course, is one of them. Health-related things, if you have a health issue, or if you're not taking care of yourself, like you're not exercising, you're not getting enough sleep, you're not seeing enough sunlight, you're not eating enough food. Social isolation, of course. It's funny, I'm repeating myself because the same kind of core things cause all these other problems. Like when you don't exercise, you don't have friends, it causes all these different things. I'm repeating myself because there's like a few fundamental things that if you just fix those, it reduces everything else. But some other interesting causes of burnout beyond kind of the work burnout, beyond like overwork, is that you're maybe doing a job you shouldn't be doing, like we talked about earlier. Maybe it doesn't match your current goals. But another thing that's interesting, Arthur Brooks actually pointed this out, which is as we get older, our ability to do things change. In other words, the people that are best at coming up with really innovative, fresh, out of the box ideas, I hate to say this, don't get mad at me, I'm just the messenger, are usually younger people, like 18, 20, 22. I mean, if you look at a lot of people that are starting like revolutionary tech startups, most of them are young. And it's just the truth that when we're younger, we're better at coming up with these completely innovative ideas. But as you get older, you get better at other things, like what's called crystallized intelligence. You get better at seeing different facts and putting them together to get the big picture. You're better at mentorship, things like that. You're better at detecting trends. So one thing that causes burnout is if as a 50-year-old or 60-year-old, you keep trying to do what you were good at when you were 20, you're going to drive yourself crazy because number one, you're not going to be as good at it as you were. And number two, you're going to spend more and more time trying to do what didn't take you too much time back then. And that's just because your brain has changed. The trick to that is you have to be honest with yourself and say, well, I'm just not as good with this. I mean, look at an athlete, right? You don't see a lot of 50-year-old NBA players. You just can't do it at that age, regardless of how much time the 50-year-old NBA player spends at the gym regardless of how much broccoli and chicken breasts they eat, they're just not going to be good enough. So we have to be honest with ourselves and say, well, I can't do some of this stuff as well as I used to, but I could do other things maybe better. Let me shift what I do so I'm doing what I'm good at. And then that will make me happier. And it's a great way to reduce burnout.
Okay, Dr. Greg, a few final questions. What's some of the biggest challenges you see that you help, other, say, family offices or leaders with in just thinking this way and changing, how you do a number of these things to increase your health span and longevity, all that?
Well, I think one challenge with family offices themselves is that they view themselves as there to provide financial advice and tax planning recommendations. And so they have a narrow view of what a family office should do. What we talk about is your clients don't want you just to do that. Your clients want you to take a holistic approach where you're providing lifestyle services, you're providing wellness. In fact, I think a family office should include a chief wellness officer, because the wealthy people, they don't want to go to 50 different entities to do something. The reason they have a family office is so they can go to you and you can take care of all this stuff. I think the problem for family offices is that they have too myopic of a view. But I think fundamentally the big problem that people have with changing is that change is tough. You're used to doing things a certain way. Maybe you've done it a long time. It's worked out well for you because you've got a lot of money and you've got a good title. And your peers are doing it. So you think, well, why should I change? Because that's just how it's been. So I think you have to convince people that, look, the circumstances are different. You're older now. You're not optimizing things like you should be. And you're just digging yourself into the ground. Let's refresh how we're looking at things.
What are some of the most important metrics that you track?
Well, so from a health standpoint, that's actually a really easy thing to do, and it's gotten a lot better. So I mentioned the Oura Ring earlier. So there are lots of cool wearable technology from a health standpoint. There's lots of cool wearable technology things you can do to gauge your wellness. These things measure your sleep quality. They measure your exercise and steps. They measure your cardiovascular resilience and how much you're exercising, all that stuff. So from a health standpoint, there's actually a lot of good metrics for this. And then you can combine that with labs. There's actually some great tests you could do that your regular doctor probably won't order, but there are these biological age tests, for example, that you can order. You can even get some of them yourself without your doctor, that will look at how old you are biologically. So if you're a 50-year-old person, but the test shows you're more like a 65-year-old person, you got to kind of get yourself in gear. And so you could look at changing things in your lifestyle and then see how that changes these biological age tests to get kind of quick feedback like you were talking about earlier. And then I think more than that, I think from a mental health career standpoint, there are good gauges where you could look at people's mental health and how happy are you now? What fraction of the time are you spending with people you enjoy? How often are you seeing friends? And you could follow those metrics and you'll see that they improve.
I've heard people that, and I've wanted to get one for a long time and haven't done it, like an Oura Ring, or I know Samsung makes one as well, I think now, that's pretty popular. But I've heard people say the ring told them that they looked like they were about to get sick. I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
That happened to me, and I got the flu the next day from my kids, by the way. Kids, they're like pools of germs.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never tracked my health that closely, but that's so neat. I do track sleep. But Dr. Greg, tell us, just as last question here, how do you like to give back?
Well, so for many years, I created these two charitable organizations to help girls and women in sports. What we did then, there's an EY study that found that when girls play, I have two daughters. This is what got me motivated in this. There was an EY study that found that when girls play sports, they're much more likely to become successful businesswomen, probably some combination of toughening them up and teamwork and learning how to deal with losses. It's good. So we did this big project to try to encourage more parents to get their girls to play sports. Now I'm launching this project. It's just in the early stages. And if people are interested in this, reach out to me because I'm excited about it, but I'm just dabbling with it now. I call it healthy and cheap. It's easy to say, like, do all these things, but a lot of these, unfortunately, they cost money. If you're going to eat organic blueberries and stuff like that, it's not cheap to do that. So I want to try to figure out a way that we can make as many healthy habits as possible accessible to people that can't necessarily afford to spend a fortune, at Whole Foods every week. So I'm working getting that off the ground now. If any of your listeners are interested in that, I'd love to chat because I think it's a great project, but I'm just in its infancy at this point.
Well, why don't you go ahead and mention, how can the listeners really learn more about your work and books and things that you're producing?
Yeah, so I wrote a book about wellness called Why Doctors Skip Breakfast. You can grab it on Amazon or Audible, places like that. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. If you want to speak with me or look for my stuff, just look for Gregory Charlop on LinkedIn. My website is gregorycharlopmd.com. I'm also on X and Threads. I'm not really so much on Instagram, but I'm most places. But if you go to my website or LinkedIn, those would probably be the two easiest places to reach me for people that want to chat.
Dr. Greg, I'm grateful for your time. And no doubt, me and probably all the listeners have learned so much from you or been inspired to think about maybe our actions today differently and how they're affecting, ourselves 20 years from now or even a year from now, I think, right? And how our career maybe affects that in a big way. And maybe we should be thinking about it differently than we thought about it 20 years ago. No doubt. Dr. Greg, thank you again so much for your time. Anything else you want to leave with the listeners before we go?
Well, I really appreciate you having me on. It was a great discussion. I know we didn't talk too much about real estate, but I think, the stuff we discussed, I think would be relevant for people, whether you're in real estate or finance or family offices or even college. So I appreciate you having me on.
Dr. Greg, that's the end of the show.